Hello, everyone. It's me, Steven Mendoza. I'm going to be sharing a little bit of tips and tricks for Excel here. So right now I'm sharing my screen, and imagine you work for a company and imagine you're asked to track what the forecasting would look like if you were to increase employees' salaries by 10% or 15%. Make up a company, include the data description, and then just list 10 fictitious, or in this case, 12 fictitious um, staff IDs that correspond to different employees. And let's just assume, for purposes of this exercise, that the salaries for these employees range between, and they're random, between bottom of 30,000 and at the higher end, they're 90,000. Okay. And then we can just hit control D. And then that now has unique salary figures for each of these 12 employees. And because I use the rand function, every single time that I'm going to, you know, add a formula to this or refresh the data, these numbers will change. For purposes of getting these figures to just stay put, I'm going to paste them back as values. And now we're going to be using the array function to basically get the current salary and forecast what it would look like with the 10% increase. There's many ways to do this. For purposes of simplicity, I'm going to use an array function. The array function calculates multiple values at once. So you just equals B4 down to B15 times 1.1, which is effectively a 10% increase. And then when you hit enter, everything is now in column B is everything now is multiplied by 10%. We're going to do the same thing here. Equals B4 to B15 times what is 15% is 1.15. And then now you have an array function that is going down all the way to D15. And it's super simple to calculate. Now we're going to do totals. So we're going to just sum it up. Copy this formula. Control R so that we're shifting it now to the right. Do the same thing with average. So equals average. Copy. Oh, copy, Control R. Median. Oh, median. And get your data set. Copy it. Control R. Sweet. So now we would just like to figure out what would be the salaries of just all the employees 50,000 and greater. So this is where I'm going to introduce you to a sum if function. So the good thing about Excel is it actually kind of guides you with which each section of the formula. So what is it going to be our range? Our range is this. Our criteria, if it's greater than or equal to 50,000. And then what is your sum range? Sweet. Okay, and then you're going to just copy this forward. And now what are the salaries that are less than 50,000? Basically, you're going to have a very similar formula, but we're changing the criteria. So we're going to select this range, and then we're going to, the criteria is now, if it's less than 50,000, and then your sum range is here. And you'll know you did this right if the salaries that are below 50,000 and the salaries that are greater than 50,000, if you were to add these up, you see how it gets you to 658,438. That's exact same as the total. All right, now let's kind of introduce the idea of a VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP. So say, for example, if someone was to tell you, hey, we need to know what the forecasted salary would look like for employee AB011, and we need to know what it would look like if there was a 10% increase in their salary. This is a very simple data set, but if we had something that was multiple pages or multiple thousands of rows, we could simply find that by looking at a VLOOKUP function. or an XLOOKUP function. But for purposes of um, sharing both, I'm going to just start with the VLOOKUP. So again, follow the formula. What is your lookup value? You're looking up here. Where are you looking at looking for it? The table array. You're looking at this whole table. You can just copy it. Since we're just looking at 10%, we don't need to include what's in column D. And then let's go ahead and it says column index number. So how many columns are there? 1, 2, 3. You're looking at the third column. This column, the third column corresponds to the 10% increase. So this is where you would hit 3, and then your range will look up. You want it to be an approximate match or a false match. I'm going to go ahead and just ignore that for now. And let's see, let me copy the formatting. Okay, so let's just check if this is true. Now, AB011, look at AB011, a 10% increase would be 35,567, which is exactly what we have here. Now, there are limitations to VLOOKUPs. The pros are it's easy to use. It obviously works in older versions of Excel, but it only reads left to right. And if we were to add another, say, for example, we want to look at the current salaries with a 5% increase, and we want to add another column, your formula could get disrupted because it's still looking at the same table, but now what's in the third column is basically non-existent. And again, VLOOKUPs only read from left to right. Now, say for example, you want to know, let's say we copy this value here, and we're trying to figure out which one of these employees would get paid this amount of money with a 10% increase. You can't really use a VLOOKUP because what you're trying to find is something that's on the left-hand side, and VLOOKUPs only read from left to right. So this is kind of where you might want to use an XLOOKUP. XLOOKUP is something that is not too difficult. Again, just follow kind of the steps here. You want to do XLOOKUP equals this lookup value. You're looking up this figure, and where are you looking at? You're looking at in column C. Okay. And then what do you want it to return? Well, you're looking for the staff ID. You're trying to find out what employee is going to get paid this amount. And then you just go X. And this is actually perfect here because again, 6290. Let's go ahead and highlight this. We're trying to find out who would be paid this much with a 10% increase. And we see here that it's AB008. So that's a little bit of an overview on VLOOKUP, XLOOKUPs. I tend to lean more towards XLOOKUPs because they don't have as many limitations as a VLOOKUP. Because again, VLOOKUPs only searches from left to right. They can break if you insert or delete columns. You need the exact number of column numbers, and it could be slower with big data sets. I tend to always use XLOOKUPs because use column names instead of numbers. It doesn't break if columns are added. It supports exact matches by default and can return multiple values at once.